As Mongol armies withdrew from the ruins of the Hungarian kingdom in the spring of 1242, Europe was left with the frightening prospect of what to do should the horsemen of the Great Khan return. In today's episode, we will look at European preparations for such an eventuality, and how these measures worked when Mongol armies did come back into Europe. Lucky for us, these days if the Mongols did come back, we'd only really have to worry about what to make them for dinner, or let our sponsor HelloFresh worry about that for you. This service delivers fresh food to your home within a week of it leaving the farm, but specifically they deliver precisely what is needed to create dishes on their meal plan. You pick items from their menu beforehand, now featuring a Mediterranean range, and then follow foolproof recipes to create rich meals without a second thought. They offer vegetarian, pescatarian, and fitness-focused menus too, so you can dine according to your wants and needs, with all the admin taken care of for you. And it's all top-of-the-line, flavorful picks with seasonal tastes mixed in, and plenty of kid-friendly recipes too. You'll waste no more precious weeknight time sourcing and planning meals, waste no more food throwing away unused ingredients since you get the right amount to begin with, and waste no more money. HelloFresh is up to 72% cheaper than getting food from restaurants or grocery stores. Use our link or go to hellofresh.com and use code POGKGSEPT16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 surprise gifts. When the armies of Batu and Subutai withdrew in 1242, Europe was in a state of panic. Hungary had been occupied for a year, the Polish duchies had been ravaged, and Mongol forces had darted into the eastern parts of the Holy Roman Empire and Austria. Early in 1242, Mongol armies had also cut through the Balkans, with one force perhaps even approaching Constantinople, then under the rule of the Latin Empire. During Batu's leisurely withdrawal from Hungary, he thoroughly sacked anything which survived the first Passover. Then he sent more troops into Helicina-Volhynia when passing through there. Ultimately, he did not return to Mongolia, but settled on the Volga steppes. The Mongols did not disappear into the distant mists, but seemed all too close and ready to strike again. The situation in Europe was tense. Pope Gregory IX had died in August 1241 in the midst of a violent confrontation with the Holy Roman Emperor, and his successor had reigned only days before he too passed away. It took 2 years for a new pope, Innocent IV, to be ordained. In the Holy Roman Empire, an attempt at an anti-Mongol crusade in 1241, under the emperor's son Conrad, had collapsed into civil war in Germany by that autumn. In 1242, the Saintonge War broke out between France and England. Despite optimistic suggestions by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, there would be no united front among the European monarchs in the immediate aftermath of the Mongol invasion. For those on the front line of a possible Mongol return, such as Bela IV, King of Hungary, this was unwelcome news. The powers of Europe had, by and large, offered no real support during the midst of the Mongol onslaught, and it was clear no assistance would be forthcoming for further preparation. When King Bela returned to his kingdom in the fall of 1242, he quickly got to work. He had no pretensions that the Mongols would not come back to finish the job, and threatening letters demanding his submission were a regular feature of the rest of his reign. Bela had to prepare for their inevitable return. One of his first actions was to bring the Cumans back to his realm. These Turkic nomads had previously sought shelter in Hungary before the murder of their leader caused them to abandon Bela to the Mongols. Bela coaxed them back with promises of land and a marriage alliance. His son Istvan was married to a Cuman princess who was then baptized. The Cumans were given a section of the Great Hungarian Plain depopulated by the Mongols. The hope was for the now settled Cumans to be a first line of defense should the Mongols return. For the rest of the 13th century, Cuman horse archers remained one of the most important parts of the Hungarian army. Much of the kingdom's population had been driven to the westernmost part of Hungary, near the Austrian border, or north into what is now Slovakia. From the Danube River westwards, Bela ordered and encouraged the nobility to build more fortifications, particularly in stone and on more rugged, hard-to-access locations. These had been some of the few fortifications which had survived the first Mongol assault, such as at Esztergom, though they also represented ongoing trends in European castle construction. With the death of the last Babenberg Duke of Austria in 1246, Bela then went to war, unsuccessfully, with his Bohemian neighbour Ottokar over those lands, a failed effort to push his kingdom even more west. One of his key strategies was also to establish a network of marriage alliances with Polish dukes, the Duke of Bavaria, the princes of Halycina-Volhynia, and with the Rus princes who had fled into Hungary. With Halycina-Volhynia, Bela offered encouragement for its ruler, Daniil Romanovich, to declare his independence from the Mongols as King of Ruthenia, making a convenient buffer state between Hungary and the Mongol Empire. Alongside those relationships, Bela continued to contact the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, seeking aid, funds, troops, whatever they could spare, presenting himself as the frontline defender of Christendom. With Pope Innocent IV, Bela had a relatively supportive ally, who organized the First Council of Lyon in 1245 to deal with the threats to the Christian peoples, the Mongols, the fall of Jerusalem in 1244, and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick. But Innocent's papal successors were less keen on Bela's continued exaltations for support. Pope Alexander IV and his successor Urban IV both essentially told Bela to shove it, critiquing his reliance on pagan Cumans and basically telling him the Mongol invasions were punishments for the sin of the Hungarians. In the end, little material papal assistance ever actually came to the Hungarians. The results of Bela's policies we will return to in a few minutes, but we can compare his efforts with the suggestions his contemporaries made. The most deliberate European response to the Mongol invasion was the Council of Lyon in 1245. Pope Innocent IV invited hundreds of prelates from across Europe to discuss the problems facing the Church. Among other important pontifical matters, such as deciding the colours of cardinals' hats and excommunicating Emperor Frederick, the Church Council heard from those who had experienced the invasion firsthand in Eastern Europe. It was decided to learn more about these Mongols, and to do so, several embassies were organised. These were made up of the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans. The most well-known of these was Giovanni di Pian del Capini, or John de Plano Capini, as his name is more commonly rendered. Capini departed on his mission in 1245, arriving in the Mongol imperial capital of Karakorum in time for the election of Great Khan Guyuk in 1246, before returning with the Khan's letters demanding the popes and king come to Mongolia to submit. It was an impressive journey for a 65-year-old Italian. During his travels, Carpini took extensive notes, observations, and conducted interviews with as many people as possible, especially from European captives taken during the Mongol invasion, who provided Carpini first-hand details of Mongol battle strategy. Together, Carpini compiled a lengthy manual on how to battle the Mongols. Thoroughly, he described the appearance, dress, and customs of the Mongols, not in exaggerated mythic terms, but with the detailed eye of an observer who felt lives depended on it. His information is accurate, corroborating well with other European, Chinese, and Persian accounts. Carpini's extensive ethnography of the Mongols, whom he calls Tartars throughout, was no accident. One of the key strategies he suggested was recognizing the difference between the Mongols and the people they ruled over, for Carpini believed that should these people be freed, they would fight against the Mongol menace. Indeed, unity in the face of the Mongols was one of Carpini's primary arguments for a successful defense. Carpini was quite aware of the disunity within Europe, even in the face of the previous Mongol attack, and Guyuk Khan himself told Carpini that he was preparing to finish the conquest. Carpini's work stressed the need for cooperation between European powers, both at diplomatic and strategic levels, that is, to not allow one kingdom to face the Mongols on its own, and at operational and tactical levels. Tight discipline must be kept over troops, they must not break formation to pursue fleeing Mongols, and the army itself needed to be under unified command. No single power or army, Carpini stressed, could stand against them. Most of Carpini's suggestions were to emulate the Mongolian army. Scouts should always be on watch day and night, while the army itself should be organized in the Turco-Mongolian decimal structure to ease command. The army had to advance or retreat together, follow orders, and not break off into small parties that could be picked off piecemeal. In Carpini's view, the Mongols had to be defeated in the field. He actively discouraged hiding in castles. Doing so, he argued, only allowed the Mongols to overrun the countryside and kill whoever they came across. A castle was worth nothing if the kingdom was reduced to ash and its people were taken captive. While he offers advice on how to design fortifications to resist the Mongols, this was a last line of defense, rather than a primary means of protection. Carpini's suggestions for castle design mirrored ongoing efforts in Hungary at the time. That is, on elevated positions, difficult to target by siege machines, well supplied, with deep ditches and well-built walls. But Carpini urges the defenders not to base their entire defense on such forts. As he wrote, "Moreover, in regard to this point, it should be known that the Tartars much prefer men to shut themselves into their cities and fortresses rather than fight with them in the open. For then they say they have got their little pigs shut in their sty, and so they place men to look after them, as I have told above." No, the Mongols had to be confronted head-on before their armies split to attack several points. For equipment, Carpini listed the following. Whoever wishes to fight against the Tartars ought to have the following arms: good strong bows, crossbows, of which the Mongols are much afraid, a good supply of arrows, a serviceable axe of strong iron or a battle axe with a long handle. The heads of the arrows for both bows and crossbows ought to be tempered after the Tartar fashion, in salt water when they are hot, to make them hard enough to pierce the Tartar armor. They should also have swords and lances with a hook to drag the Tartars from their saddle, for they fall off very easily. Knives and cuirasses of a double thickness, for the Tartar arrows do not easily pierce such. A helmet and armor, and other things to protect the body and the horses from their weapons and arrows. If there are any men not as well armed as we have described, they ought to do as the Tartars and go behind the others and shoot at the enemy with their bows and crossbows. There ought to be no stinting of money when purchasing weapons for the defense of souls and bodies and liberty and other possessions. On his return in 1247, Carpini had his account read out and copied as he travelled, ensuring that it spread across Europe. As such, his work, the Histoire Mongolorum, became the most popular account of the Mongols in Europe in the 13th century. Later writers plagiarized and adapted it. The most famous of these was John Mandeville, a 14th century author who copied from Carpini for his own fictional travels. The question remains, though, did Carpini's work influence European defensive measures against the Mongols? It is difficult to answer in the affirmative. While Carpini's work was quickly popularized, there's little evidence to connect it to defensive or offensive measures employed against later Mongol attacks. Aside from the improved fortifications Carpini suggested, something which originated independently of Carpini, the hopes for united armies operating as one body to prevent the Mongols from overrunning the countryside never materialized. After the Prince of Halychina-Volhynia, Daniel Romanovich, had been encouraged by the Hungarians and Pope to assert his independence against the Mongols, he received no support beyond a papal-approved crown, and this independence was soon crushed. The 1260 invasion of Poland by Borodaj Noyan was immensely destructive, more so than the first Mongol attacks, according to the Polish chronicler Jan Długos. Here there was no record of any of Carpini's suggestions being adhered to. The Poles received no outside aid, and the battles were all sieges, in which the Mongols overran quickly the Polish defenders. The Mongols retreated laden with booty and captives, having been given free roam to ravage the countryside. In Bulgaria, the Jochid Prince Nogai's troops plundered annually over the 1270s. Only in 1283 did Nogai's troops, commanded by a Byzantine ally, meet significant military defeat against the Serbians during a failed crossing over the River Drim. Nogai and Prince Telebuka led a large attack on the Hungarian kingdom in 1285. Here, the defensive measures of the late Bela IV were put to the test, and once more no influence of Carpini's suggestions can be determined. The Cumans, who Bela had so carefully recalled to the kingdom, revolted at the start of the 1280s in response to Christianization efforts led against them. Though the revolt was put down in 1282, many of these Cumans fled the Hungarian kingdom outright, a number defecting to the Golden Horde, thus unraveling Bela's intended offensive arm against the Mongols. The second Mongol invasion of Hungary is only poorly covered in the extant primary sources, though study of these sources has advanced our knowledge of the campaign since even our own video on it. While it remains a popular claim in online circles to assert that fierce European heavy cavalry under King Laszlo routed the Mongol armies, there is no surviving source that describes any such encounter. Charters issued by Laszlo seem to indicate that he stayed in the western part of the kingdom, mostly in Buda and Pest, throughout the Mongol assault. As archaeologist Mikhail Holeschak noted, it seems unlikely that a king so beleaguered and suffering from harassment from the church and his barons would have missed an opportunity to glorify a victory over the Mongols had he one to share. Instead, the campaign was largely one of small skirmishes and short sieges. The Mongols seemed unwilling to besiege major sites and ravaged the countryside instead, and when they began to withdraw in the spring of 1285, the sources described them as carrying a considerable amount of slaves and booty. It seems up to that point, the campaign was by and large successful. Carpini's doctrine here evidently played no role in the defense. Only the botched withdrawal through the Carpathians stopped the campaign from being a success, where lightly armoured Vlachs, Saxons and Seki harassed the Mongol armies and freed a number of prisoners. As reported in sources from Poland, the Rus principalities to Egypt, Telebuka's army was lost to severe weather, epidemic and starvation, turning the mission into a disaster. It seems that Carpini's suggestions were not heeded in Hungary. When Nogai and Telebuka, now Khan of the Golden Horde, attacked Poland in 1287, the campaign was much less successful. Major cities repulsed the Mongol attacks, and the Mongols had to be content with pillaging the countryside and undefended areas. But Carpini would have found some solace in the fact that some Hungarian lords travelled in Poland to provide assistance against the Mongols. This was the closest to a united military front ever offered. The 1280s marked the last of the major Mongol attacks on Europe. Raids launched by the Golden Horde continued well into the 14th century, but these were on a considerably smaller scale. Throughout the first half of the 1300s, Khan Uzbeg showed a remarkable willingness to negotiate for diplomatic settlements when he, the Polish king, and the Lithuanian Grand Duke butted heads over Halychina Volhynia. While Uzbeg wasn't afraid to threaten a Mongol invasion, his desires to conquer the Ilkhanate stopped him from ever committing any real strength to the far west. But after Uzbeg's death, the balance shifted. The ravages of the Black Death, ecological and economic catastrophes, and repeated civil wars left the Golden Horde in a state of anarchy from 1360 through to 1380. After being stabilized by Toktamish Khan, the Horde was once again plunged into turmoil with the invasion of the great Emir Tamerlane. In the midst of this, the rulers of Hungary, Poland and Lithuania invaded the Horde's western lands. The Lithuanians took Kiev and drove to the Black Sea. Unfortunately, the sources generally offer little detail into the specifics of a given victory. Strong cavalry forces marked much of these armies, with their own horse archers. They were the types of forces which, ironically, often fared the best against the Mongols, as was the case with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and the Delhi Sultanate. Thus, Carpini's suggestions had little influence on the actual successes European armies did have, but in regard he was quite correct. When the Mongol armies were no longer providing a disciplined, united front, they fell victim to the armies that could. More videos on the history of the Mongols are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.